Hi, I am Melissa Garland, and this is my in-service project presentation. It's designed for my faculty, or my colleagues at Lake Oconee Academy, and the professional development is reading focused. Okay, the first thing that I want to talk about for this professional development is we have to start with what the data is telling us. So what does the data tell us? Let me start by telling you which pieces of data I was looking at specifically. The first thing I looked at was our CCRPI, which stands for College and Career Readiness Performance Index. And I posted the link on on this slide right here, where you can find the CCRPI data. The next piece of data that I was looking at, or the next report I was looking at, was from the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, the Georgia School Reports. And here we will look at what the data says. Okay, so from the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, the Georgia School Reports, here's a little snapshot of Lake Oconee Academy. And for those of you who don't know, let me give you a little bit of background information on Lake Oconee Academy. We are a charter school in the Lake area, which is in Greensboro, Georgia, on Lake Oconee, really near Lake Sinclair. It's about halfway between Atlanta and Augusta. Currently, we are pre-K through 10th grade and growing, so next year we will be pre-K through 11th, and the following year we'll go all the way up to 12th grade. Right now we only have about 500 students or so, but growing every year. So as of right now, our overall performance is higher than 97% of the schools in the state, and it's also higher than our district. So this is an excellent accomplishment. However, it poses its own problems, and I'll kind of get to that in just a moment. I am a third grade teacher, so I'm going to focus a little bit more on the elementary school part of Lake Oconee Academy. Our academic growth is only higher than about 21% of elementary schools in the state, and our growth is actually lower than our district. And to elaborate a little bit on the growth measure, the growth is looking at student growth from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So my interpretation of that is that our students are starting off very strong, but they're not necessarily growing at the rate that we would like. Also, if you notice, go down to the bottom of our screen right here. It tells us that only 76.3% of our third graders are reading on grade level, whereas about 90% of our 8th grade students are reading on grade level. So my goal is, as a third grade teacher, to get those reading levels up in 3rd grade. Okay, so that's what our Georgia School Report tells us. Next, I'm going to look up the CCRP, this still comes from the Georgia School Report. And this is just a chart that's showing that that Lake Oconee Academy is higher than Greene County and Georgia when it comes to 3rd grade reading levels. However, we are a school that has a standard of excellence, and that means that we want it to be higher. So we're working to get those reading levels up. You can kind of see right here that we showed a little improvement from 2013 to 2014. We saw a little bit of growth in 2015, and our scores dropped a little bit. So we're going to need to work on that. Now, on the screen, you can see our CCRPI. And CCRPI is measured on a whole lot of different things. And specifically right here, what I want to focus on is our progress points that I kind of hit on just a little bit. You can see that there were, only 51% of our students met, or only 51 students hit typical to high growth out of 91. So we want higher than that for English language arts. So that's my particular goal, is to bring up those progress points. We did really, really well in every other section. It's those progress points that I really think that we need to focus on. So what can we conclude from the data that we are looking at? And these are the two areas that I found that we need to improve on the most: our 3rd grade reading levels based on the Lexile scoring found from the Georgia Milestone Assessment, and then our progress points on CCRPI. And basically what we have to do with the progress points is just get those students that come to us that are stronger students and just push them a little bit further. We want to push them to do just a little bit more. We want them to meet our typical and high growth aims. All right, what can we do? So we know what the problem is. What are we going to do to fix it? I am going to recommend 3 reading comprehension strategies that will improve both reading levels, and it will push our students to reach expected or high growth to increase the number of progress points earned and improve our CCRPI score. So I'll be focusing on 3 different reading comprehension strategies that I think will work, or that will help both of those areas. Okay, strategy number 1, reading workshop. It's something you've probably heard of and you've probably tried, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about it in case it's been a while, you need a refresher, or maybe you haven't done it at all. So basically, the reading workshop is an approach to teaching reading that combines teacher sharing, mini lessons, student-selected reading and response, and student sharing time. All right, why reading workshop? Well, first of all, it increases independent reading time, like I mentioned a moment ago. It includes, I'll show you, student-selected reading, and I think that's a big part of it. Student-selected reading and response. Independent reading is so important, and when it's student-selected reading time, they're going to be a lot more motivated to actually do the reading. I found a quote that says, "The amount of time students spend reading real books is the most reliable indicator of students' reading achievement." So that's definitely a great reason to get our kids inside of real books, not just passages, not just different other pieces of print. We want them to read real books. We want them to spend some time in them. Another reason to do reading workshop, it develops critical thinking skills. With the combination of the mini lesson from the teacher, the independent practice, the independent reading and response, and then that coming back and concluding and sharing and reflecting, that involves a lot of critical thinking. So that's another great reason for reading workshop, rather than just drilling and killing kids with these are our phonics strategies, these are our reading strategies, blah, 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 and just making them just drill these strategies and these phonics and other skills. They're really getting into real books. They're really reading them, comprehending them, and enjoying that process, and they're really thinking more critically about those books. Another big reason that I'm a proponent of reading workshop is the student choice component. Depending on how you choose to implement reading workshop, there's a lot of student choice. They are allowed to choose the types of books, the format of the books, which I'll touch on in just a minute, and also how they're reading those books. They may choose to read in different areas of the room. They may read by themselves. They may read with a partner. So there's a lot of student choice. It's all based on what they are comfortable with and what they enjoy the most. They choose the books that they're reading. They're not just assigned to them, so they may not find them as boring. I found that when they're able to choose the books, and they're a lot more motivated to read. It's also very differentiated, the student choice, because you can allow students to read books that they're interested in and that are on their level. So there's a great differentiation component in reading workshop, because we know we have those wide ranges of learners. Another differentiation point is that we want to get all of our kids to reach that typical growth or that high growth. So we absolutely cannot have all of our kids reading the same leveled books. We need them reading on their level. We need them reading the ones that are going to push them to that next reading level. So it's very important that we keep differentiation in mind when we're looking at those progress points. Okay, what reading workshop is not? These are some misconceptions about reading workshop. A lot of teachers are like, oh, I've done that before. I've done that independent reading. It doesn't work. Well, it's not the same as sustained silent reading, SSR, or drop everything and read, Dear Time. I have found in my research that simply doesn't always work. A lot of times when you say, okay, for the last 10 minutes of class, everyone's going to read silently. Okay, it's Dear Time. Everyone read your book. You know exactly what we see the kids doing. It's this. With their books, and what are their eyes doing? Looking up at that clock. What are they doing? Giggling with their friend. They're not into those books. With reading workshop, the combination of the mini lesson, the independent reading response, and then the conclusion, you're really giving students a purpose for reading. You're teaching them a specific skill before they go into that independent reading, so they have a purpose for reading. And then you're bringing them back and you're reflecting on what happened. It's not just drop everything and read for no reason. It's purposeful reading. So that's definitely the difference in reading workshop and SSR or Dear Time. Okay, so the basic components of reading workshop, I've talked about it, I've touched on it. Basically, you start it with a mini lesson, you introduce a skill, a strategy, or anything, even if it's a behavioral mini lesson. Maybe you've had some trouble with kids who are ending up talking with their friend too much. You can have a mini lesson on that. Just spend 5 to 10, even 15 minutes with that short mini lesson where you're modeling the skill or the strategy that you're wanting to teach that day. Then next up comes that daily independent reading time where the students are reading their books that they selected and they are doing that independently. You can adapt this. They can be reading with a partner if that's appropriate. They can listen to reading if you find that that's appropriate or it works for you. And then, like I said before, student choice is a big part of reading workshop. I really encourage you to give students as much choice as possible in the books that they're choosing, the methods that they're choosing to read, and where they're reading, because we really want them motivated, we really want them engaged, and they need to be comfortable in order to do that. Response and reflection, that's the other component of reading workshop. That's when you're coming back together as a class and you're reflecting on what you did that day. What did you learn? Okay, well, how did that work for you? Another thing that a lot of teachers like to do for the response and reflection component is maybe a journal or a reading log or some other type of extension activity. But the main bones of reading workshop are there's the teacher-led mini lesson, the independent practice, that reading and response time, and then the coming back together for the closing. Okay, so this is going to be a little video and it might take a minute to load. So I'll go ahead and introduce it. This is just one example of reading workshop. There are so many different variations on it, and it's not going to look the same in every single classroom. That's a very important thing to remember. So this is one teacher's interpretation of reading workshop and how it works for her in her classroom. So we're going to listen to the things that she has to say and see how that goes. All right. And this is from Scholastic. You'll notice on the handout that I have a few different resources, and this Scholastic page is one of the resources listed. So if you want to go back and watch this and read about it, then I definitely encourage you to do so. This teacher has some excellent tips for implementing Readers Workshop. Okay, I'm going to move myself away. All right. So like I said, the video is just one component of this website, and it's just a few minutes long, so once I get it loaded, we will watch it. You can see underneath they've got the components of the reading workshop that you can check out a little bit later. Oops, looks like we're frozen. Oh goodness. Let me refresh this. I'm so sorry about this. It's exactly like when you're teaching with your students and you get something ready to come up on the smartboard or something and it doesn't work for you.
Reading workshop follows a very predictable structure in our classroom. It begins with the students.
Okay, well, obviously that video is not working, but like I mentioned, It is on your handout, so I suggest you check it out. And we're just going to move right on along to how you can implement technology into your reading workshop. I am a big proponent of using technology because I believe we have to prepare students for the world that they're going to be adults in. And technology is already very prevalent in our society, so I know for a fact it will be when our students move out of the classroom and into the real world, as we say. So we need to be really encouraging them to develop their technology skills. And so a couple of ways that you can do that specifically within Reading Workshop is with the use of Kindles and iPads and other tablets. I personally have a set of Kindles in my classroom, not an entire class set, but I've got a small group set of Kindles. So I really encourage my students to let me know when they know of books on Kindles that they're interested in, and I will download those for them. A lot of times I will just every weekend or so I'll check and see any cool new titles that are out, and so definitely stuff that I know that they're interested in. Maybe do some surveys with your students. That's what I do to see what they're interested in, and then you can go ahead and keep those the books on your Kindles fresh, so it's stuff that they're interested in. iPads work just as well, and any other type of Kindle, any other type of tablet like a Nook or anything else that you can get your hands on are awesome ways to get kids interested in reading those texts via technology. So, I mean, it's already very common for adults to be reading books on Kindles and on Nooks and on iPads, so why aren't we preparing our students to do the same? So I think it's totally an excellent idea to get our kids using those during our reading workshop time. Maybe you can include it as an incentive program for students with high achieving students, students that are making more progress, students who are behaving, and any kind of incentive system you want to set up. They can earn Kindle time or earn Nook time or iPad time. So that's definitely a great way to incorporate technology. Additionally is listening stations. They're a great way to include technology in your reading workshop. You can read anywhere in the Daily Five. It talks about listening stations and how important listening stations are for reading. So one way that I suggest trying literacy stations is through iPads, or even computers, or even the old-fashioned CD player. Any way you can get listening stations on, preferably on iPads or on iPods. That's what our students are most comfortable using, and that's probably the direction in which we're moving. Anytime you can get audiobooks, you can download those. Try to get the physical books in hand too, so they can follow along and track that print. But those are great ways to incorporate technology into your reading workshop. And now we're going to move on to our next strategy we're going to talk about, which is learning logs. Learning logs are similar to reading logs, and I am a proponent of both. I'm talking specifically about learning logs, mostly because of their versatility. So learning logs can be implemented not only by the reading teacher, but by content area teachers as well. Learning logs really can help improve reading comprehension by encouraging students to be reflective about what they're reading and learning about. Specifically, I teach science and social studies, and I really try to integrate as much reading as possible into those situations, and so learning logs are a great way to help students make those connections between what they're reading, what they're learning, and how it's affecting their growth. Why should we use learning logs, you ask? Well, learning logs support fluid and ongoing understanding of what our students are reading and learning about. So instead of piecemealing things together, students, every time they're reading, every time they're learning, they're able to journal about it in this learning log. Generally, they're going to be I'll just get to that in a minute. Okay, they also encourage a lot of metacognition, which we know is great. That really supports critical thinking, right? We want to encourage metacognition of the content learned and also of comprehension strategies we're learning. The comprehension strategies are most likely going to be more prevalent with the reading learning log for the ELA classroom, but you can definitely incorporate those in your content area classes as well. Another reason to choose learning logs is that they're really important for developing note-taking skills. We know that note-taking is very important for our students as they move on to higher education. They've got to learn how to take notes, and learning logs are an excellent way to practice that. So that's why we should do learning logs. So here's a little video introduction to learning logs. Maybe if you're not very familiar with them, this can give you some background knowledge on how to use them. And hopefully this video will be more effective than the last. It's on YouTube, so I'm assuming that it will.
Alright.
Okay, let's get it maximized. And I'm going to go away so we can watch this.
So if everyone could pull out your ELA learning log, please, and turn to not the writing section, but the reading section. We use learning logs in 3 different subject areas. We have an ELA, a math, and then a science learning log. What we are going to do is we are going to be creating a little Frayer model. It's going to be a little different than the ones you do for math. In our ELA learning logs, the kids do several things. They creating a little Frayer model. It's going to be a little different than the ones you do for math. In our ELA learning logs, the kids do several things. They either are taking notes, they are doing reader response activities, or they are working with vocabulary. So it's a great way for us to incorporate writing into everything that we're doing. You're going to be creating a Frayer model for all 10 of the colony's vocab words. The learning logs are usually teacher-driven. We give them a prompt, and then they can write and respond to that. And then the idea is that occasionally they will turn them into me. So at the top of a blank page, if you will write colony's vocabulary, I will be able to write a note back to them about what they said or what they wrote, and they really look forward to reading what I've said. So that's cool to see them excited about what did my teacher say about what I wrote. I know today we talked about writing within math and how that looks different, and how you have to explain how you got to your answer. That's great that you got the answer, but explaining how you got there is a new concept for them. You know, Frayer is divided up into 4 separate boxes, and the word's going to be in the middle. So go ahead and draw. And we use a strategy called ACE. And in reading, it means answer the question, cite evidence from the text, extend your answer. But in math, we use that same acronym, but it stands for answer the question, make sure you have your label, and then construct a model. So that's where you show how you got your answer, and then explain is how you write it out in words. And so that they make sure they have all 3 parts. And the learning logs are awesome because everything's in one place, and it helps me as the teacher keep writing in the forefront of my mind since it is such a big focus, and we're constantly trying to find ways to incorporate writing into all the different subject areas.
Okay, so I really enjoyed that teacher because I appreciate her perspective on the importance of including writing in all of our subject areas. We have learned that writing and reading are extremely reciprocal processes, and so it's kind of hard to teach reading without teaching writing. And when you're teaching reading, you are teaching writing. When you're teaching writing, you are teaching reading. So learning logs really help us forge those connections. I think it's natural to include reading instruction in every single content area and to integrate subjects using reading, but we also are working, I know as a school, to incorporate writing into all of our content areas. So learning logs basically take that reading instruction we're doing in our content areas, extend that thinking, have students reflect on what it is that they're thinking using graphic organizers. Maybe they're using a what I learned and what my reflections are model. But basically they're taking that reading, they're thinking about it more deeply, and they're recording it very frequently in those learning logs. Okay. Some suggestions for using technology with your learning logs. Once again, I'm going to hit on the technology component because we know how important it is. Blogs. Blogs are an excellent idea. The word blog has log in it, so you can kind of get creative in how you introduce that to your students. Kids are very familiar with blogs nowadays. They like to read them, so I'm sure that a lot of them would be extremely motivated to write their own blog. They can have their math blog, their science blog, social studies, whatever it is that you're teaching, and you can have them blog about their learning, and I'm sure that they would get really into that. So you're building that technological literacy as well as content area literacy, and as long as you are incorporating a lot of reading in that, then I think it's really going to be very beneficial for our students. Another suggestion is online threaded discussions, which is something that we've learned about a little bit in class. It's something that many of us have done in our undergrad and grad school work, so I know that a lot of us are familiar with using online threaded discussions. Now, Class Chatter is an excellent website that we can use to host a class discussion. You can have threads for each section that you're learning and have students do that all together. And also Ning is another great website that your students can kind of have a social community in which they are logging their learning about a content area subject or anything else that you're working on. So that's how you can incorporate technology with your learning logs. Okay, the third strategy I want to talk about is the literature circle. The literature circle is an engaging instructional strategy that motivates readers. It promotes social learning and discussion, and it promotes independent reading and writing. I am a big old fan of literature circles, mostly for their versatility. Just like I mentioned that Reader's Workshop has a lot of versatility, well, literature circles have just as much, if not more. And also, literature circles can easily go hand in hand with Reader's Workshop because it's something that your students can do during that independent reading time. They really go hand in hand. So it should be very easy for us to implement both simultaneously. Okay, why literature circles? I know I've started every single strategy with why, but I think it's a very important discussion that we need to have. So why literature circles? Well, I mentioned already they're very easily adaptable. I don't care if you teach kindergarten or if you teach 12th grade, you can somewhat adapt literature circles to work for you. They are very differentiated because your literature circles are going to be your groups of students that you create are going to be determined on interest. They can be determined by reading level and by personalities. So they're very differentiated. And as we try to move those progress points up, we're not necessarily looking at, oh, my kids can do this. It's, oh, well, this child went from here to there, rather than everyone being at the same level. So it's very important for us to differentiate when we're looking at improving those progress points. All right. They support cognitive and social constructivism. This is an area that I'm very passionate about, is cognitive and social constructivism. A lot of us learn in college, but here's a slight refresher on cognitive constructivism. It's just the idea that rather than the teacher dispensing knowledge to a child, that the teacher facilitates this child constructing his or her own knowledge of a subject or a content area skill. So social constructivism is very similar. It goes along with the ideas that students construct their own knowledge. However, there is a social perspective there that students, when they work together and when they bounce ideas off of each other, that they're able to construct a little bit more meaning in their learning. So literature circles are extremely effective in supporting social constructivism as well as cognitive constructivism. When students get together and they discuss their learning, they're sharing different points of view that one might not be able to come up with on his or her own, and they're able to see different sides. They're able to just take things a little bit further than they can do on their own. So I think that's a very exciting aspect of literature circles. Another reason for literature circles is that they help develop teamwork and cooperation. So when you put the data aside, we have to remember that we're teaching children, we're teaching them to become adults, and all adults need to work on teamwork skills, and they need to learn to be able to cooperate with one another. And when they're in a literature circle, they're building a little bit of a community in there. They're really developing those teamwork and cooperation skills. So that's just a little background on why I think that literature circles are going to be effective in helping us improve our data. Okay, how to start literature circles. So I remember when I was first introduced to them, I didn't know how to start this. You have this idea of students sitting around and discussing books, and it sounds great, but what are the logistics of this? How do you make this work? The best way to start is just pre-selecting books for students to choose from. It's important to give them choice. However, we really need to guide them and facilitate this selection of books for them. We want to make sure that they're choosing quality books. We want to make sure they're choosing books that are on their level or near their level, something that's appropriate for them, that they're going to have success with and not struggle with too much, but also not too easy, so that we want to push them a little bit. So you can pre-select books for those students to choose from, and this is where you choose how you want it to work for your classroom. You can choose a set of books for a certain group. You can go ahead and decide the group, or you can allow the groups to form based on the students' choices. So that's kind of up to you, what works for your classroom. I have even spoken with some teachers who don't have all of their students participating in literature circles. Only some of them are. So if you only have one group of students participating in the literature circle activity, you're only coming up with one group of books. If you're having all of your students choose books, you're going to have a wider range. If you've already determined groups, then you might create a selection for each group to choose from. It's really what works for you, how many books you have on in your mind that you want your students to work with. It's very adaptable. But that's the first step, is giving them those books to choose from, and I guess kind of determining how you're going to set up your groups. Another important part of literature circles is teaching the students the roles that they will play. Hopefully we're going to be seeing a video in just a moment that's going to elaborate on the specific roles students will play. And after that video plays, I will elaborate a little bit more on the specifics of the roles. But we know the importance of really preparing our students, that when they're prepared and when they're knowledgeable about a task, they're going to be a lot more successful, and they're going to be a lot more responsible and independent. So it's very important that we teach them the roles to play. I suggest modeling them, displaying them in the room, and then just being there for them and helping them assume the roles that they will be playing. Another important aspect of this that is totally up to you is you can either assign students the roles, or you can allow them to choose their own. So that's just how it depends on how it will work for your classroom. The next is assigning groups or allowing students to do so independently. So that kind of goes back to how you're selecting the books. That's kind of going to play into your overall plan. So next up is providing independent reading time. So the literature circles are for them to discuss the books, not necessarily to participate in the entire reading process. So you need to provide them time to read. It may be one chapter, it may be a whole section, depending on how the book is divided and depending on the level of your readers. but you're going to give them a little bit of time to read independently. And then the last step of literature circles is just giving them that time to meet and discuss the books. The teacher's role in this is really just to facilitate. You might occasionally meet with students, ask them some questions, maybe give them some support if they're struggling with that discussion, but really let them go wild and see what they can do, because they might surprise you in the discussions that they have. Also, when you're facilitating and meeting with those groups, you can encourage some extension activities for them, and then just start the whole process over and just see how exciting it is. Alright, we're going to watch 2 videos. The first one is a 3rd grade classroom example of literature circles. And then the next one will be a 5th grade. And so you'll get to actually watch the students participating in those literature circles, and it's very exciting to hear the kind of conversations that they're having. So I'm going to pause it while I get this video loaded. Okay, so it is loading. Now press play.
Most about like classic narrative. Someone that gets in trouble a lot because he keeps getting in trouble. He's a bunch of other stuff. Getting in trouble because he's joking around and stuff, like most. See, that kind of reminds me of Jason. In one of these parts, like. Why did she even want you? Yeah, this is what I was wondering about. If Cricket did try to get Lucas in.
Okay, since this video is having trouble, I'm going to upload this video to both of the videos from the presentation into the module. So just look for those. And I'm sorry about that. This worked it worked absolutely fine when I practiced. But I guess that's life. Okay, so literature circles and technology. The ways that you can incorporate technology into our literature circles are through Kindles and iPads, and that kind of goes hand in hand with what I discussed when we learned about Reading Workshop. You can just download the books that your students want to read onto the Kindles or the iPads or the Nooks, or I'm sorry. Alright, the next thing you can do is record conversations. This was an excellent strategy that I picked up, that students can use some kind of technology to record the conversations that they have while their literature circles meet, and then later on they can replay it to reflect on what was discussed. It's kind of difficult for them to remember everything, but they can go back and they can listen to what they said, and they can write and reflect on that. Also, if they record their conversations, that's a great assessment tool for you as their teacher to go back and listen to see that, if your whole class is all meeting in literature circles, there's absolutely no way that you'll be able to hear all of the conversations that are going on. So this is a way that you can go back and make sure that hold your students accountable for those conversations. Also, just the fact that they're being recorded could be enough motivation and incentive for them to really take it a little bit more seriously if they know that their teacher's going to be listening in. So the next is the online threaded discussions, and I brought those up when I talked about learning logs, but they can also be effective when you are doing literature circles. Maybe you can start some literature circles with some students in other classes, and with that you can create a community and have them discuss the books. They'll each have their roles, and they'll be able to use those when they discuss, or when they get online, they can use those in their threaded discussion. Okay, so I just paused and I got the 5th grade video to load, so we're going to X out of this really quick and hopefully you get to watch that because it's a really good resource. So fingers crossed this one works for us.
Make sure that you're sharing as much as possible about those connections you made. Today started out with a literature circle, share out. Each person has 2 minutes to share. The rest of their teammates are listening and learning. They did all 5 of their jobs. First job is the summarizer. We're going to start out with our summarizers. I'm looking at D'Angelo, Denasia, Stephanie, George, and Jose. They're in charge of hitting all of the major points in the chapter. First, next, then last kind of thing. So basically a good overview of what happens. 2 minutes begin now. Can you then speak about that for 2 minutes to 4 of your peers? It's their time, 2 minutes. And then can you learn from what somebody else is saying? Because a lot of learning is also listening.
It describes Wayne in chapter 6, Zachary Beaver came to town.
The second person, the visualizer, is in charge of picking the best setting of that chapter. So where does the action happen and why is that setting important? Make sure that you're sharing for that full 2 minutes. Go ahead and begin. They're in charge of pulling out text evidence of what's in the scene and then also drawing a picture of it so that they can kind of visualize with their mind's eye what's happening in the chapter. Alan, this is great text evidence. Okay, I'm glad that that's what you pulled out from the chapter. The third person is our inferencer, so taking what characters say and think and how that impacts who they are as people. It's sort of the more in-depth analysis of how characters are interacting in the chapter.
On page 69, when Yolanda, she turned the 2 fancy pens, she was maybe...
Did she mean that she had fancy pants? What was she doing to her? What do you call it when you say something that sounds kind of nice, but you might not mean it to be so nice? Maybe sarcastic, right. So was she being nice to her? No, what was she being instead? Abel, what was she being? Yeah, kind of like bragging. Yep, so that's a good example of noticing what they say, but what they actually mean when they say it. It's a good inference. Go ahead and continue. The fourth person is in charge of picking out a symbol. They're the symbolizer, which is the big idea or theme of the chapter. Go ahead and begin. Oftentimes people are asked to find the big idea of a book, and so we try and practice that with individual chapters.
My symbol that I chose is courage. Because on my STAR test, it took a lot of courage because I was afraid.
Nice, that's a great connection there. And the fifth person is the word detective. So they find interesting or tricky or just uncommon words and break them down based on their suffixes and prefixes and their connotation, and come up with their own definition based on the context clues in the chapter.
Page 162. The sentence that had this tricky word is he aims the nozzle straight up. The consonant was neutral.
Right now you're going to read chapters 17 and 18, and the jobs have already rotated at the board, okay? I've found that when they are practicing each of those skills in a really strong way, they get excited about what they're doing. And when they can understand the story and can then explain it in an engaging way, the rest of their team is more interested in what they have to say.
What is his purpose?
My purpose is to show the setting.
You'll see a lot more students sitting up and listening and leaning into what students are saying here week 3 into the unit, whereas first couple of days, it was very quiet. Speak a little bit louder so that everybody can hear you, okay?
And Toby does not want to answer because he's afraid.
And so it's been really cool to see their enthusiasm and volume both match as they've gotten stronger at this.
Okay, so there's that video. And I really wanted to make sure we watched that video because of his focus, the teacher in the video's focus on the roles of students in literature circles. So the ones that he used in that one are not necessarily the roles that you have to use. I've also heard of teachers that create different roles. Some teachers would like to do the director position, and some they direct the conversation. I've seen some teachers incorporating an artist as a role. So there are lots of different roles that can be played, and that can be adapted to your students, their interests, also the standards that you're trying to cover, and the number of students in each group. You can also pair some different students together to create to complete a task together if you have too many students in a group and not enough roles. It's really up to you and your students. Okay, the conclusion of my presentation, I want to leave you with this message, because I know as teachers we are constantly thrown different strategies and we're not always really comfortable enough to really dive in and incorporate those into our classrooms because we don't necessarily feel like we're ready. But this is a quote that I wanted to share to kind of inspire us to incorporate these new ideas into our teaching. It says, "Move out of your comfort zone. You can only grow if you are willing to feel awkward and uncomfortable when you try something new." So I thought that was a really good message to hear, that, you know, the only way we're going to get better is if we step out of that comfort zone and try new things. So try this stuff. We're going to meet back. We're going to discuss it, and we're going to share our thoughts. We're going to reflect, and we're going to grow as teachers, and our students are definitely going to grow because of this. Your resources page includes some suggestions for further reading. It's got some videos that you can watch so you can kind of see things, see some more examples before you try this stuff out in your classroom. And it's also got some websites and some blogs that you can check out that have a lot of teachers sharing their personal experiences with these strategies that may be helpful to you. So I hope that you learned something. And I really expect to see some major growth right this year with our 3rd grade Lexile reading levels and our school's progress points on CCRPI. Thank you so much for having me and for listening, and I will see you and speak with you soon. Thank you again.